Well, you note that the genealogy is knocked out into 3 equal sections or eras of the people of Israel. The first one of these is the era of the patriarchs. The patriarchs, that starts with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it lasts roughly 1,000 years from Abraham to David. Then you've got the period of the kings. Now, the kings are in that second section there, and that starts with David, and you'll see the kings on the right-hand side. Everyone who's a king is highlighted in blue. And somebody pointed out to me earlier that Ammon did not get highlighted in blue, but he is a king as well. And there are 14 of those that are all listed in a row. Every single one of them is a king. Now, this era lasts about 500 years, give or take, and it's the era that people generally think of as the golden era of Israel. The third era that we have in there is the era of the exile. Now, the exile means that the people of Judah were transferred to another place, to Babylonia, later on ruled by Persia, and that they were isolated from their homeland for what turned out to be 140 years. Now, the time frame is 500 years, and what all those 500 years have in common is that during that entire time, Israel was ruled by somebody else. First Babylonia, then Persia, then the Greeks, then the Romans, but during that whole time, somebody else was in charge, and they were never a nation for themselves. Most people read that third section and don't recognize any names from that section, and that's because the people of Israel were small and powerless during that time, largely forgotten. But that time made them yearn all the more for the king to be coming. Now, each of these 3 sections is broken into segments of 14 each. And you'll notice that Matthew is really clear to point that out at the end of the genealogy. Look all the way down at the bottom in verse 17, highlighted in red. It says this: "Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Christ." 14, 14, 14. Now, in this world, there are 3 kinds of people: those who can count and those who can't. So for those of you who can count, you may already be doing some head math and seeing some issues going on here. You look at your first period, the patriarchs has 1,000 years, but 14 generations are marked out for it. That means that the average dad would have had to be 71.2 years old when he had his first kid, if there are only 14 generations. That's just not plausible, not during that time period. And in the era of the kings, you see 14 names listed, but we know from other passages in the Bible that there were 20 kings that reigned during that time. But Matthew is really clear to point out that there were 14 generations. One of the things that's important for us to be aware of when we're looking at genealogies in the Bible is that in the ancient world, it was quite normal for people to skip generations, especially if you're doing a genealogy that goes 2,000 years back. Just for brevity and relevance, sometimes it just makes sense to skip a bunch of generations. So when they use that term father of, that could mean ancestor of. Or if the genealogy is going the other way, son of could mean descendant of. It was normal and it was just very high integrity to be able to do that. It was understandable in the way that they put together their generations. So Matthew's being really intentional here to pick the number 14, 14, 14 as he writes out his lineage. Why would he do that? Because biblically, 14 is not a big deal number in the Bible. It doesn't symbolize anything that we know of. Now, 14 is not a big number, but 7 is. 7 is an important number. It's the number of completion. It's associated with God's plans, his perfect plans, and his character. So instead of dividing it up into 3 14s, what if we divided it up into 6 7s? You go, okay, that starts to make sense, but it's still incomplete. I mean, if something was going to be truly amazing, the complete of the complete, the perfect of the perfect, it would have to be 7 7s that would be put together. Maybe the message that Matthew is giving in the genealogy is, guys, the 7th 7 is here. A new generation is being kicked off, and it is the ultimate generation that we've been waiting for the entire time. Because 14 plus 14 plus 14 plus 7 equals 7 7s. And you notice that the lead character at the front of each of the 14s is a key figure. Abraham was the lead patriarch at position 1. At position 3 would be David, the greatest king that ever lived, and Jeconiah, the first one being in exile at the 5 position. 1, 3, 5. The next significant character would come in at 7, and he would be the greatest of them all. What Matthew's saying is, you should be anticipating that king that we promised, and he's not just going to be an ordinary character, he's the beginning of the 7th 7, a new king and a new kingdom. It's going to be amazing. I read a story this morning about a sign that was seen hanging in a store that said, "Let's make this the best Christmas ever." And underneath, some wise person, perceptive person, scribbled a legitimate question. It says, how will we top the first one? See, when the God of the universe crashes into our reality in order to become a baby king, it's impossible to top. Impossible. Even if you have really good gingerbread houses, there's no way you can beat it. So hang on to that thought for a minute, because there's one more problem that we need to solve before we come to the king. But before I go there, let me ask, are you ready for the king?